America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every Thursday about this time. I had some technical difficulties before. I think I worked out the sound. Thank you for staying with me if you have. But we're going to talk about a very important topic today, and it's going to be trauma as oppression. And you have to understand, I was talking to a buddy about this, and she was just kind of breaking down her research for me. And I put some extra things together. And look, we have to understand trauma as the most immediate form of oppression. And the problem with it being the most immediate form of oppression is that it could be treated outside of reason, because reason deals with mediation. Reason deals with how all of the parts, what a thing is, breaking it down into parts and how the parts all function together to make it what it is. But if trauma is immediate, then you could deal with it without actually an analysis and dealing with it without actually through reason. And that's going to be a problem. And that's how you can get kind of a way of approaching trauma, PTSD, without actually addressing the ethics of soldiering, right? So if we can address the expression of PTSD without actually addressing the ethics of soldiering, that's not actually addressing the trauma, but it is dealing with the immediacy of the experience, right? So it's a dangerous little tool. And after the intro, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about how this kind of emerged in the 80s with respect to Vietnam syndrome. Lots of wars and lots of syndromes. So maybe it turns out that wars break soldiers, but maybe the problem is soldiering, and that there is some sort of dissociation that's promoted through military service, especially when you're just kicking open doors and shooting people, right? So maybe that's not the worst. Maybe it's perfectly healthy to be traumatized, but because you, even as the oppressor, are suffering under oppression because it's just an unhealthy way of being, right? And insofar as we make you numb to that oppression, that's not going to be particularly good in any way. We don't want to be numb to oppression. Even the oppression you feel as an oppressor, like kicking open doors, right? With guns. So the idea is that trauma is the most immediate form of oppression, but as immediate, it is outside. It can be conceived of as outside of reason, and that's going to be a problem insofar as it will actually calcify oppression if we treat it as trauma, if we treat the trauma aspect of it, the trauma form of it, as primary. And also when we treat the immediate experience of it, the trauma of it, as somehow emancipated from oppression, then you're not actually treating the trauma, because the trauma is still a form of oppression. It's just an immediate form of oppression. Right? So how do I explain this? I can explain this using triangles. I teach logic and critical thinking, and so I have to always kind of come up with examples. There's things called concrete universals, and concrete universals are known for generating their own specifications. For an example, a triangle is a concrete universal. If you know what a triangle is, it's a figure with three sides, and each side has length, and lengths can be bigger, smaller, or equal to each other. So just knowing that, that to be a triangle, you're going to have three different kinds. You're going to have scalene triangles, where all the sides are different lengths. You're going to have isosceles triangles, where two of the sides are the same length, and you're going to have equilateral triangles, where all of the sides are the same length. Just knowing what triangles are, it generates its own specifications. So if you know what a triangle is, but you don't know the specifications or how they relate to each other, or how they're going to be 3 and not 5, then you really don't know what triangles are. Your knowledge of triangles is abstract, because if you had any sort of concrete knowledge of the triangles, you would know that you would know it in its specification. You would know all of its specifications. You would be able to kind of conceive of its specifications, and just by your knowledge of a triangle. Or if you know one of the specifications, if you know scalene triangles, but you don't know its relationship to equilateral and isosceles triangles, you don't really know what scalene triangles are, because part of what it is to know what a scalene triangle is to know that, okay, it's one of 3 types of triangles that could be, right? So that's going to be the person who's a trauma expert but doesn't really know anything about oppression. They're going to be the expert in scalenes but not know anything about triangles. Oh, I don't study triangles. I study scalenes. But aren't scalenes a form of triangles? Yeah, but I don't really study the form of triangles. I study scalenes. But I don't really know anything about triangles. So you know about scalenes, but you don't know about triangles. Yes. Well, then maybe you don't really know about scalenes. And you can say, well, I know about scalene rectangles and scalene trapezoids and scalene, octagons, all of different lengths. But you don't know anything about octagons or pentagons or triangles. And they'll be like, no, I just know scalenes. And I was like, well, then you have hazy knowledge of all of it. And that's a person who has knowledge of trauma but doesn't know anything about any of the various specifications of oppression. And so why is that so popular? Well, it's popular because we want people to be functionally oppressed and oppressive without suffering the immediate effects of it, right? Without suffering its immediate form. And with that, I will hit the beat.
Me, never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I'll paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front. To the beat, y'all. Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I'll paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front.
Man, it finally looks like I got my sound game right. I can relax. This is take 3. And I tried to do this right before my kids get home, so the first take, I realized the sound was bad, and then I could look at the clock, and my kids were about to get home, so I tried the second take, and then I heard the bus come up, and this is take number 3, so the kids are upstairs. So I'm going to be speaking rather quickly because I love my kids. Not that I don't love you, I just love them more. And so I want to spend time with my kids. All right, so trauma is the immediate expression of oppression. So if you just know trauma but you don't know the expression, it turns out of the oppression, then it turns out that you might not actually know what trauma is. And you might not actually know how to treat it because you're not treating it as a form of oppression. It's like treating someone with a broken leg by giving them lots of morphine. You're treating the most immediate expression of their broken leg, which is their pain, but not actually treating them as having a broken leg. Pain management. Trauma is the pain of trauma counseling is the pain management of health, which means it's not really about health proper. Right? So we have to figure out how this became so popular. Well, I was talking to a buddy and she was like, well, you have to think about Vietnam syndrome. When trauma really kind of emerged. There have always been wars, and wars have always broken people, and there are always syndromes. But trauma, we started talking about trauma, especially in the 70s and 80s, with respect to Vietnam. And it happened to coincide with sexual trauma. And the way we started talking about trauma. And now that's a whole problem because, once again, if sexual trauma is a variety of oppression, then being able to talk about trauma without actually talking about the oppressive circumstances that lead to that kind of intimate partner violence is actually going to confuse what's going on with the sexual trauma. But, nobody ever gets in trouble for just indulging the crap out of victims, right? So we indulge victims and then we keep them functioning in whatever oppressive systems they're functioning in or not understanding. And now to be an expert in trauma, you don't actually have to understand oppression. And that's going to be an enormous problem. And all of this ends up being anti-Black. No matter what, none of this is ever good for Black men because it's not as much as Black people talk about, Black men need therapy. Yeah, we might need therapy, but we also need to end oppression. And so we need a more kind of muscular therapy that includes money, land, and guns than just sitting on talking to some white lady on a couch. All right. So that's it. I like my therapy in the form of cash. A check, make it out of cash. Actually, if you care about my mental health, go ahead and go over to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in or anxiety meds for a broken leg. Yeah, I'm very anxious about my broken leg, and the anxiety medications will help me deal with my anxiety for my broken leg, but I have a broken leg. Right. So yeah, if you care about my mental health, go ahead and go over to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month to help me kind of create the quality of news that, one, makes me downright unemployable depending on who you talk to, but also I think kind of clarifies your situation. Because that's what I want to do. I want to clarify your situation. And in this episode in particular, I'm going to say a lot of things that are going to make people uncomfortable to hear. So I might as well just get to those, right? So dealing with what are the stakes of dealing with sexual trauma as trauma, not a system of oppression, right? Well, the stakes are that we don't deal with the system of oppression. And a lot of the people who are traumatized and do the traumatizing are themselves oppressed or profit from the oppression, right? So a lot of traumatized women, I'll say, not black women, a lot of traumatized white women profit from the culture of sexual oppression and violence that will realize itself in their trauma. So if we can deal with the trauma but not actually deal with the oppression, then white people keep the perks of whiteness without actually dealing with, the better just relations. That's the same thing I was talking about or suggested when I was talking about how we can keep we can deal with the trauma of PTSD and war without actually dealing with the oppressive ethics that might actually go into soldiering. Maybe soldiering is properly degrading. Maybe soldiering is not something that we should be doing the way we do it. Maybe, so maybe maybe that kind of trauma is the healthy response to what we expect soldiers to do. And, soldiers are disproportionately black and they recruit out of the hood. And maybe that's not particularly great for us. So what, and I had a friend who was like, yeah, a lot of this came to the head in the 80s with trauma and with sexual trauma. And look, if white women don't want to actually deal with or think about oppression, they just want their cushy gig back before they were traumatized by, whatever, then this is a great little nugget because we get to deal with the trauma by abstracting it away from the oppression, because the oppression might actually keep them fed and housed and actually pretty comfortable, but might erupt occasionally in trauma. And so there's a way in which I'm going to get into trouble. I'm going to back up one more time, then I'm going to go right in and say what needs to be said in this video. We have to understand that oppression has a structure, and the structure is all the parts that fit together and function in a way that make it what it is. And if you deal with the most immediate form of oppression, that is trauma, you don't get the structure, which makes the trauma outside of reason, right? So why would it be good to have to isolate trauma outside of its oppressive structure and not see it as a form of the oppressive structure? Well, it's not because you actually want to understand the trauma, because in order to understand the trauma, you need to understand it as the immediate expression of this oppression. It's because you don't want to deal with the oppression. You just want to anesthetize or somewhat deal with the effects of the oppression. You don't want to actually deal with it. So you don't want to actually understand the trauma, because you don't want to understand it as a form of oppression. You just want to deal with the effects, which will keep and often calcify the oppression. So what does this have to do with sexual ethics? Well, the discourse kind of picked up around trauma in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, because it kind of intersected with, the sexual violence and sexual trauma kind of motif. And you got a lot of white women who actually profit very much from their second tier status, because remember, they're second tier in a nation of 30 tiers. So being second tier isn't so bad. But the most immediate form of the trauma was bad. So they needed some place to talk about that without actually going into a deep dive into the actual structure of the trauma, because they needed white racist assholes to do everything else that white racist assholes do except screw like assholes. They wanted them to screw like better people, right? So we need white racist assholes to be assholes in the streets, but in the sheets, we need them to be better. And so in order to, or I need to like numb myself to how they're bad in the sheets, right? So there's a way in which the trauma response is actually a mode of calcifying oppression rather than dealing with it, right? Because, don't make no mistake. White people like the white people they create. And a lot of white mothers like their white sons who go on to rape their white wives, who then create white sons who then take care of their mothers and then rape their white wives. And so like it's a pretty vicious circle. White sex is not particularly great. So what I have, I'll be more specific. Settler colonial, and I think just high-class sex in general, isn't particularly great. Everyone would be surprised if it turns out that Donald Trump is a great lay. I don't think Melania, slept with him for his like thoughtfulness in bed. I suspect not, right? So what I'm saying is that there's a culture of oppression that distributes perks, but it also distributes trauma. So if you can figure out a way to anesthetize yourself to the trauma, but keep the perks, you're going to do that. And that's what white women have done with the trauma discourse in America. And now we're kind of spread trauma all around. Like black people, we have trauma and we need therapists, sure. And everyone says, black men don't go to therapy. And yeah, that might be true. But like I said before, I like my therapy in the form of cash and land, and black people might need it in the form of guns. So what does this mean that people who experience trauma, and just because they also experience some of the perks of oppression, deserve their trauma? Not necessarily, but let me go back a little bit and talk about concrete universals again. So a concrete universal is a universal that generates its own specifications. That means like a triangle, you can generate, just by knowing what a triangle is, you know that it's going to come in three kinds. You don't know the concrete individuality of where each kind is going to come up in the world, but you'll be able to like apprehend it and see it when you see it. Oh, you'll be like, oh, that's a scalene. Oh, that's an isosceles. But just knowing what an isosceles or what a scalene triangle is doesn't mean that you'll know that you'll run into one tomorrow. Right? It doesn't mean that. There are empirical issues at play. But when you do run into one, you'll be able to understand that this is what's going on. Right? So that's a very important limit of concrete universals. They don't actually get down to time and place and like empirical characteristics of all of their existences. But with a necessity, they'll give you the concept and the specification of what you're looking for. Right? So when I say that it might be the case that in an oppressive system, trauma emerges, we don't know. It's not the case that the traumatized necessarily might deserve their trauma as individuals, but like we who uphold the oppression kind of deserve it. Right, and there's a great, there are two things I'm going to talk about. Disgrace by James Coetzee. It's a great little book if you've read it. John Malkovich made a movie. I read the book before, and the book's so good that like I don't know if it all gets through the movie to the movie. But I read the book. It's a great little book, and the movie like seemed pretty good to me. And also, there's a miniseries called The Honorable Woman. So in the miniseries, there is this Israeli weapons dealer. Big Israeli weapons dealer, makes bombs and then bombs for bombs and more big bombs, arms dealer, arms manufacturer, bombed a ton of Palestinians. Right? And so 25 years ago, the Israeli arms dealer was murdered. And then like, a few years ago before the series is set, it's called The Honorable Woman, the daughter of the Israeli arms dealer was kidnapped, and she was sexually assaulted while she was in prison, and then she was released a little bit later, and she's an heiress now. She's like because when you sell, it turns out if you're really good at being an arms dealer, you can make a lot of money, right? So she's an heiress, and she was kidnapped, assaulted, and then released, and the miniseries takes place around that. It's fictional, but it's very good. And at the end of the miniseries, I'm going to ruin it if you haven't seen it, but whatever. At the end of the miniseries, she comes face to face with like the person who masterminded her kidnapping and assault, And he asked her, do you know why you did it? And the guy's Palestinian and like has like multiple people killed by her father's bombs. And she looks him in the face and she says, yeah, I deserved it. Now, that was a very powerful moment because it's not often you see like white women on television say that they deserve their sexual assault. But it's not because of and it's not because of anything she did, but there's a way in which the resentment of having her father arm and like supply munitions and make absurd amount of money, and she's now an heiress for killing this guy's all of his family, the like, you know, the shrapnel and all that was found in their family. There was a way in which she individually didn't deserve it, but like her class deserved something, right? And unless you see that, and it just happened to be that, like, as a concrete individuality, she paid the price. And like, I got in a lot of trouble because I was like, well, after 9/11, I was like, nobody in the Twin Towers deserved to die that day. But did we deserve to be attacked? We as the United States deserve to be attacked? I think that might be a complicated issue. I think that like we have to talk about moral desert. Nobody individually deserved, but did we deserve? And they just like got unlucky by being an unlucky part of us. Well, that might be a question we have to ask ourselves in a more robust way, because the answer is not going to be obvious or clear. Did we deserve it? I don't know. Maybe. Did the people who happened to pay the price deserve it? No. As individuals, like not more than any of the other Americans. So that was interesting. A part of The Honorable Woman, she, like the billionaire heiress who was kidnapped, like looks her captor in the face and she's like straight up says at the very end, probably the penultimate moment, the most important part. Yeah, because I deserved it. And that was very, not because of anything she did. She's just a weapons dealer heiress. But, you know, justice is intergenerational. And we got to think about that, what that means. All right. So the other thing about Disgrace. Now, Disgrace is a book where it's about a South African professor who is just like, you know, gross white guy. He's a South African professor. He sleeps with a student, you know, a half black student. And, you know, she consents, but what does that mean when he's your professor and he's this white guy and you're a black South African? Consent's kind of like the least important part of that relationship. And then he gets disbanded from the university in a big hullabaloo. And he moves out to his daughter, who lives out in the country in rural South Africa. So his daughter's in rural South Africa, you know, her and a bunch of white people from the city had bought a bunch of land. All the other white people had left. So now it's just her in this kind of big farm plantation type thing in South Africa. He goes to live with her on the farm, and it turns out that it's possible that their black neighbor / person who kind of works for them in the village might have orchestrated a kind of home invasion where like some stuff was stolen, broken, and the girl was sexually assaulted. And the white daughter was sexually assaulted while the white professor, the father, was living with her, and like he was just kind of regular assaulted. And so what happens? So what happens is the girl kind of figures out that it's possible that the neighbor orchestrated it, and the dad kind of figures out that the neighbor orchestrated it, but they see the neighbor every day, and the neighbor kind of works for them as like a handyman type guy. And it's just kind of a deeper, and the dad wants to like go to the cops and turn the neighbor in, and the daughter's like, no, it's settled now. Because like the neighbor lets it know that like, now this is dead, we're even. And so it's kind of a deeper story about colonialism, because there's a way in which the daughter kind of understood, in a way, she deserved it. And what does it mean? Like, what does that mean? Like, in a way, it's if the trauma is figured into the oppression of colonial South Africa, And like, she was unlucky. It came out this way, it was expressed in this way, but it actually somehow addressed the oppressor, the oppression. And now, like, it was known that the issue is settled now. The handyman neighbor keeps working for them, and everything is going to be okay now. Everything is okay, but like, it came at a price, right? So the idea is that colonialism comes at a price. Oppression comes at a price, and sometimes this price comes in the form of sexual violence. So what do we do about that? And I have another story about that, because this week, at UGA, I was minding my own business, and let me get the art up here for you. I was minding my own business, and I got an alert on, I want to say Saturday morning. I got the alert, and the alert said that there had been a mugging and a sexual assault on a parking lot at 2:30 in the morning next to campus. And, I read, because I don't like those things. And so if you don't know anything about Athens, Georgia, Athens, Georgia is about third black. The poverty is racialized. It's one of the poorest counties. It's one of the poorest college towns in the entire nation. The poverty is racialized. The black descendants of slaves here are not doing that much better than their grandparents. A lot of them are doing worse because their grandparents actually owned houses, except with the university wanted a bunch of land the university wanted a bunch of land in the 50s and 60s with urban renewal, so it kicked a lot of those black people out of their houses. And so the black people who have grandparents who owned houses now grew up themselves in public housing because, their grandparents were kicked out of their housing. Now they're getting kicked out of public housing, and they're just kind of being cast off in the South like the Walking Dead. And that's a problem. So I got the picture up. So I saw the bulletin in my email, and so I did some searching, and then the next day they came out with a picture of the dude who did it. And this is the dude who did it. He's a 24-year-old guy, and they came out with a picture of him. And, I've been in Athens for a few years now, and I'll tell you, by the time this is you're 24 years old, and you're running around like at 2:30 in the morning, taking like random UGA students' cell phones, because that's what we know is that he stole their cell phone. They're also charging him with groping and like sexual assault, but I'm one of these guys who've been in and around enough police reports to not actually know. Like I know police reports are fiction, so I don't know what happened. Maybe it was about that. Maybe it was just about like I reached into her pocket to get her cell phone and figure out if she had any money. But like this is the dude, and of course, because this is the dude, they found him like days later, and now his life is pretty much it's thrown away. Like by the time if you're caught assaulting and sexually assaulting and robbing a UGA student, and you're just a 24-year-old random black dude, like you're done. Like I don't know if you ever see the light of day again, or what that means, because you don't know who her father is. Right, so 2:30 in the morning, this guy steals and attacks a woman in a parking lot. So, this is the white UGA media's fantasy and the white liberals' nightmare. And me, I just look at it and I think, we create thousands of these guys in Athens. Like, by the time this is you have been betrayed, defrauded, and degraded by so many public institutions that other white people have actually profited off of. Like, your white teacher still got her checks for not teaching you how to read. Like, your white probation officer, like, so many white institutions have made money off of this guy's existence. And now his life is done. And, there's going to be a white judge who makes money off of him, and like a white ADA who makes assistant district attorney who's going to make money, and a white, So like white people are not done profiting from this guy's degradation. And so it's tempting to make the story all about the lady victim he victimized, which he did do. Well, allegedly. I don't know what he did sexually. I just know that like they say groping, but they also say he stole her phone and all of this stuff. What I do know is that guy is pretty much disposable in society. He's only relevant because he made someone who actually matters, really, really uncomfortable. He traumatized somebody else because like his trauma, his immediate and like systemic oppression, nobody really cared about or wouldn't have gotten this far. There are a myriad of interventions that go into place before this guy's walking around at 2:30 in the morning trying to get like stealing cell phones and knocking out, drunk college students. Right? So you're not going to get this in You're not gonna get this in any other news media, which is why you need to go and support www.funkyacademic.com, because nobody's gonna look at that story and say like, if that's the villain, then we need to talk about like, because so many other things have gone wrong in that guy's life. So many other things have gone wrong in that guy's life. Like poverty rates out of control in Athens, and it's racialized, and like that guy just looks like everybody else I know who's black in this town, and I know a lot of them who've just been like just degraded for their entire life. And so it's not like the individual girl had it coming, the individual college student had it coming, but we had it coming as the society that upholds that guy's oppression. And she just had to pay the price for the price he has been paying, for the price he has been paying for his whole life. And so we're going to deal with her trauma, and the story about this when it gets in the media is going to be about her trauma. And we're not going to deal with like the system of oppression that found its most immediate expression in her trauma, but it assumes that like he liked doing what he was doing, or that that same system didn't like create and mold and form him. So we have to talk about that in a way that I think is important. So thank you for your time, and go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com, kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month for me to keep doing what I'm doing, because this is important. So, recap, trauma is the most immediate form of oppression. As the most immediate form of oppression, you have to watch out because that puts it outside of reason, because reason deals with mediating factors and how all of those factors work together to make a thing what it is. So if we find a way to isolate trauma from the oppression, we can actually find a way to calcify the oppression while treating the trauma. And that's why you get the discourse out of Vietnam with, dealing with Vietnam syndrome or PTSD while not dealing with the ethics of soldiering. We've now put that trauma model all over like our public discourse. And in the 80s, it really found a home in sexual discourse. So now we deal with a way of dealing with sexual discourse, sexual assault as sexual trauma, but not as like the expression of a variety of oppression. And that is kind of a big problem. So the young criminal wasn't wanted by his society. So we have to understand that what the traumatizers and the traumatized victims are actually part of the same system. And unless you're serious about the system, and you just take a one-sided notion of the trauma victims in a way that actually calcifies the system. And so we'll be telling this story forever, except the perpetrators are going to be bigger and blacker. And this doesn't mean that the individual victim deserved it in her concrete individuality, but it means that we deserve it. And she just got unlucky. And she paid the price for what we all uphold. All right. Thank you for your time. And I will see you next week to talk about something else.